Hi, everybody. This is the Acoustic Guitar Show, and today we have a very special guest. For the first time, we have a mastering engineer instead of a regular sound engineer, and he's introduced by this. So please welcome Jonathan Wyner.
Hello, Daniele. How
Hello. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm here sitting at home, happily speaking to you halfway around the globe.
Um, Thank you for doing this, even from so far away, but with the internet, there is no so far away
That's
anymore.
right. That's right. It's only time zones, I think, that limit us.
It could be any time of the world or of the day or the night. I want to thank you so much for doing this. I'm enjoying what you do on the web for the whole isotope thing, and I really like your approach with instructional things
Thank
because I
you.
think it's a very complicated subject. Always, when you teach something, it can be very hard or very easy to understand. It depends on who's talking.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy to do this, which is pretty odd, probably, compared to what you do usually. We are a small niche, I could say this, the acoustic guitar players. I am an acoustic guitar player, and I've been writing for a long time about acoustic guitar. So, would you? I read the credits
Mm.
regarding your career, and they're just too long and important to to say anything. So, please say something about you, and we will start.
Well, so I started as a musician myself. I've always been. I, I think the beginning, the genesis of my interest that's led me to this moment is that I've always been interested in the way that technology can comes into play and augments creative our creativity, the our ability not only to distribute, and capture music, but also to be creative with it. And so I remember when I was in high school, I was a French horn player. Before that, I played trumpet, I played piano,
Oh,
not very well, which is why I do what I do on the other side of the glass. But I still play. But I remember I walked into a class one day. We had a substitute teacher, and he was a trombone player. And I walked into the room, and there was an ARP 2600 synthesizer sitting by him. And he took his trombone, and he had a mouthpiece with a pickup drilled into it, and the lead was into one of the control voltage inputs on the ARP 2600. And he was basically bending the synthesizer to his will to create new textures and new musical ideas that weren't possible before. And I think that moment crystallized my, everything that I've been thinking about and hearing about. And in the 1960s and 70s, I grew up in a household with composers, and so I was exposed to George Crumb, and I was exposed to Stockhausen, and also, sort of 20, 18th century and 19th century Western classical music. But I was also listening to the radio, and Michael Jackson was playing, and Sly and the Family Stone, and it was just like this big stew of music and sound that just stimulated my brain. And I think that's what set me off on my journey, on my love of the way that technology augments our creativity and our expressive abilities in every respect, from the standpoint of performance or recording. And so here I am today. So I started as a musician, became a recording engineer and producer, and then started mastering records in the mid 1980s, 1985, 1986. And I've worked on records in every genre, by many
yeah.
artists whose names you know, and so many more whose names you'll never hear. And yet, every record is a wonderful adventure. It's really fun.
Oh, great. So you have been a recordist and an engineer before a
Oh yeah,
mastering engineer. So
yeah.
you
And
captured.
frankly, for me, I think it's an essential component of being, whether you're a producer or a recording and mixing engineer or a mastering engineer. I think the ability to understand music, musical language, and also have some empathy for what's happened every step of the way. I mean, when something comes to me that is maybe a little unusual sounding, to have some sense of how it got there, to be able to sort of understand what might have been in the process, understand what the issues are, and then how can I be helpful to either correct them or at least um, to bring out the best of what I'm hearing. But I think if you don't understand recording or mixing as a mastering engineer, it's easy to overshoot the mark. It's easy to make. I mean, a mistake is maybe too strong a word, but it's easy to make mistakes.
Yeah, yeah. It's too easy to make mistakes.
Yeah. Well, you can get caught up in the theoretical and become untethered from reality,
Yeah,
I think.
sure. So, from the very wide perspective, you always have to have, because being a mastering engineer is like, supervising the final product. So there is no genre, there is no, or I mean, probably there is, but there is no such thing like a small thing like the acoustic guitar, which is just a tiny bit. But in the at the same time, our instrument, when I consider that as a solo instrument, which is what I do mainly, is one of the few really polyphonic instruments, and has to be treated like an orchestra. Of course, you don't have very deep bass, you don't have very high frequencies, or you have them, but maybe not like with other instruments. So this is going to be pretty wide.
Mm.
Let me start with this. What if I say acoustic guitar
Okay.
to you?
Well, let's see. It's funny. Just as you were speaking, the name Michael Hedges came to mind.
Oh man!
So, which I've worked on a couple of Michael Hedges records. So,
Oh, great! Which
that
ones?
I don't remember titles. This is in the early and mid 1990s. I was doing a bunch of work for Wyndham Hill
So
and some of their
probably
artists.
Breakfast in the Field or Aerial Boundaries.
Yeah, uh, I
One of those.
I won't remember the titles.
Oh, great!
Yeah,
But this is beautiful.
but when you say
Michael
acoustic,
Hedges is one of the top ever.
yeah, a whole bunch of things come to mind. It's both my favorite acoustic guitarists. When I grew up, I was listening to Christopher Parkening also, and
Classical.
yeah, um, oh goodness gracious, I'm gonna have trouble remembering the name. Sharon Isbin is a friend of mine, um, and so I remember all of the amazing classical guitarists whose work I've admired. Hans Reichel is a name that comes to mind, an experimental German
Yeah.
acoustic guitarist. Goodness gracious! But I also think about um, some of the interesting challenges that recording acoustic guitars has presented in my life.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
you mentioned this notion of having to fill the canvas with the sound of a solo instrument, um, like an orchestra, like an acoustic piano, like a harp. Actually, harp is a very interesting example. I've done a bunch of harp recording, um, acoustic harp, also electric harp, but acoustic harp, and how you present that instrument in a way that is satisfying, that sort of paints, fills the canvas. I think that's the phrase I love to use to help you think about the sort of image being large and colorful and deep and having, you know, I think everybody can relate to this idea of filling of an image. I'm sorry, my cat wants to be in the video here.
Oh,
Um,
great. We love cats.
yeah, good. Um, and yet, not not um, there are things that feel like there are mistakes that we can make sometimes by trying to create an undue sense of size, exaggerating the
Okay.
sense of size of a single instrument in a recording. If you think about an acoustic guitar, in a room as you approach the guitar, it feels like a confined phenomenon. You know, it's over here. It's a whole sound that has integrity, and every note that's being played is in close proximity to every other note that's being played, and there's a blending of the sound. And if you get in so close, you know, the sound starts to fall apart. Or if you do crazy things with stereo miking or too many microphones, you can create a sound where the sound kind of becomes disassociated. You lose that sense of sort of integrity and the sort of the
Yeah,
blend, the sense of the instrument.
we'll get
Um,
to microphones and
yeah, yeah,
everything.
yeah, yeah,
Right, I like this.
yeah.
So your first answer, what if I say acoustic guitar? You said Michael Hedges.
That's
You
right.
got it. That's a that's a good answer. Uh, this might be a weird question, but is there one acoustic guitar sound in your mind from a record, something when you were a kid, or something when you were a trained engineer that let you something? Is if there is one?
Um, yeah, not. I mean, not really. You know, again, when I mentioned Michael Hedges or Sharon Isbin, their records are exquisitely beautifully engineered, and they sound fantastic. Um, but I think, you know, it's hard. What guitar are we talking about? You know, what are the strings made of? What's the style of the musical, the composition? What's the genre? You know, is it supposed to be deep and soothing, or is it supposed to be aggressive and
Oh,
engaging in
I
that
don't know.
way?
It's your answer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Whatever.
So I I I guess whenever I see the word best and sound put together, I immediately want to pull back and it's like, whoa, I need a little more context. I'll tell you what I like, but I'm not going to evaluate. You know, I think there are a lot of bests.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I
Yeah.
was just thinking, some memory or whatever. But I know this is probably weird because I made a life out of this while others didn't.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's not probably an easy answer or an answer that exists at all. Um, do you have any stories about acoustic guitar that something that happened to you in studio or while engineering something or memories or whatever? We have lots of things to talk about, so it's just a small introduction.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll come to mind
Yeah, maybe something will come to mind. I mean,
while we speak.
I do remember some early adventures in the studio with friends of mine around recording acoustic guitars, but nothing that's I think is all that interesting.
So you were
Mhm.
talking about this briefly. When it comes to acoustic guitar, mono, stereo, or
Stereo.
stereo, just the traditional.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I mean, I think stereo. Here's why I say stereo, because an object in space is what we're talking about when we're talking about musical instruments and musical sounds. And we're always observing using basically a binaural, we hear, we experience life in stereo,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
We have two pickups and some sound deadening material in between, right? Stereo. And so whether we decide to place a mono pickup of a guitar in a stereo field, it's still going to come from some direction for us. And if we decide to augment something with a surround field, 5.1 reverb or immersive audio with height channels to express the acoustic around an instrument, it really is still this kind of front facing plane for me. So stereo, I think, is the beginning for any conversation.
Great, great. This is an answer I'm getting pretty often because engineers are usually, we are going to speak to lots of our readers or people are watching the interviews, which really don't have a knowledge of all the recording processes and everything.
Yeah.
One question I'm getting asked very often is, should I get one microphone, two microphones? Everyone is, two microphones is better
Yep.
than one. I usually try and say, maybe get one in the beginning and try changing the placement and see how you play, your sound is, before getting into phase issues and everything when you have two microphones.
I guess I would say get two microphones. Um,
Oh,
but
great.
I like what you're saying, which is to start with one and understand how the sound propagates in the room as you move towards or move away from a guitar, as you move towards the hole or away from the hole. But at some point, you are absolutely going to want to use two. Um, and I just want to pick up on something you said, which is phasing. We have this word that we use that sounds very technical, which is phasing. And when people first think about phasing, they think it's either an absolutely good or an absolutely bad thing. Phasing is wonderful. Phasing is what gives us stereo, right? If it wasn't for timing differences between in the time of arrival at our ears, everything would just appear to be right in front of our heads. The reason I know that I'm hearing a sound outside from over here is phasing. Phasing is great. Phasing is what gives you the blending of the sound of an orchestra to make it sound like one sort
Yeah,
of
sure.
one thing. So I think being able to sort of developing an understanding of what the implications are when we have problems with phase interactions is very valuable, so that then you can sort of look out for those things. But otherwise, it's just such a great part of our sort of sandbox, our toolkit. um,
Yeah, great.
Microphones are like the paintbrushes for engineers. you know
Yeah,
where we put them and which ones we choose will influence what we hear.
yeah.
um,
It's
so
amazing when
yeah.
you get a microphone for the first time and pair of headphones, and you're standing in front of the microphone with a guitar, and you just rotate. You do one thing and you rotate in front of the microphone. That's crazy. That's crazy. It's like 50 players in 50 different places with 50 different microphones. And that moment when you realize that a few, uh, we have centimeters, but inches or whatever, are changing so much,
Mhm, mhm.
that's where the fun begins and where the trouble begins.
Yeah, it's fun trouble. That's right. I mean, this is probably one of the reasons that some performers like to use pickups instead of microphones because they don't want to feel confined when they're performing. And if a performer is too self-conscious when they're performing and thinking about the microphones, it has the potential to influence their performance. I would rather have performers not have to think too much about being locked in and maintaining the position to get the perfect sound. This,
Sure.
frankly, is one of the reasons why I would say two microphones, because the position of a guitar compared to a single mic is more likely to create unwanted variations than if you have a pickup of an area. And so there's some freedom for the instrument to move within a stereo field and not have the sound change in a way that's unwanted or unpleasant.
Yeah, sure. Uh, the last record I just recorded with a couple of microphones the engineer put in front of me, stereo, couple pair. I don't remember, Sheps maybe,
Mhm,
microphones.
mhm.
I don't remember which ones. And I think I changed 6 or 7 guitars without changing anything. So it was like someone, what you just said, someone listening to me playing, and in the clearest possible way, cleanest.
You're reminding me. There's a man named Bruce Swedien. I don't know if you've heard his name. He's a very
He
famous
just
sound
he
engineer who
just passed away.
just passed away.
Yeah,
And he made some of the greatest big band recordings ever, and of course worked on the entire Michael Jackson output.
yeah,
And a genius, worked very closely with Quincy Jones. And one of the things he liked to do, he recorded everything in stereo. and would leave the stereo pair and then have, I mean, maybe 90% of what he recorded would be that way. There would be certain elements in a pop record that would just be mono. But if he wanted a sound to come off center, he would say, okay, stand over there. And he's got the stereo pickup. And now the localization of that sound would be according to what the stereo field would say, instead of having to
Before
pan it.
panning.
Yeah, it was panning. Right. It was sort of the original panning, right? Um, that's the way records
Before
used to be
panning,
made.
after panning.
Right.
This is something
Yeah,
like
that's right. It's postmodern panning. Um, so anyway, you just reminded me of him. Um, but and you reminded me of something else, which I guess I'll say now, and we can come back to it if you want. But to me, recording is an illusion. We should never forget that when we're creating a recording, in my way of thinking, it is impossible to recreate the live event
yeah, sure.
because it is not the live event. It is a
Yeah.
reproduction.
It's a
And
pair of speakers.
it's not only that, but the way that we respond emotionally and intentionally when we're in the presence of an instrument playing is very different. Um, it reminds me of what it's like listening to the recording of someone speaking versus being in a room with someone speaking. If you go to a live lecture, you know, if there's ambient sound or whatever, you can tune it out. It's no problem because you're so focused on the speaker. I'm focused on you right now, and sort of having this conversation. It's not quite like being in the same room, but there's this
Yeah, sure.
attention that's present. If I were to go back and watch this later, and if there's any background noise, I would be much more likely to notice it because the experience is
Yeah,
different. My attention is different. My
yeah,
way of focusing on the experience. And so, what triggered this thought for me is your comment about it just sounds like me playing in a room. It never really just sounds like you playing in a room.
of
it,
course.
it's always going to be an illusion. And I think when we think about making recordings, it's important to acknowledge that because then we can leverage that idea to help us create something that's compelling and and give us something that a recording can give us that a live experience can't. I mean, there are things we get live that we can't get in recording
Yeah,
and vice versa.
yeah, you're saying so many interesting things. This brings up another issue, which I'm not really trying to deal with today. But imagine when I go on stage, I usually have I would like to have people listening to me, but instead when I play, my sound is coming off two big speakers, huge
Yeah.
speakers on the side,
Yeah.
and that's a nightmare if you're not used to that. You have it's a different sport, you have to learn to play guitar, and then you have to learn again to play guitar amplified, which
Yeah.
for an acoustic guitar player is crazy.
Yeah. Same for a harp.
Yeah,
And
sure, sure.
and so when I would do live sound for an acoustic harp on stage, I would always require that there would be some center fill because otherwise for the audience there's a complete disconnect. I mean, if I'm listening to you and you're here and the sound is over,
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
it's not very satisfying.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so I would always use some kind of center fill, even if it's just very small monitors or something pointing out towards the audience, some way to anchor the sound.
yeah.
Because I know for a fact it's hard for audience members and it's hard for performers.
Yeah, I saw concerts. I was standing in front of one of the speakers on the side, and I
Right,
never heard what was going on the other side of the stage because of panning.
right.
So that's crazy. What you say just brought up this next question: microphone versus pickup. Maybe this is more uh, for a recording engineer, but this can be a nightmare too. I perfectly get what you said. The pickup allows you to really move if you want or whatever. When I record, I'm just sitting down, but I get the point. But microphone is such a beautiful
Mhm,
sound
mhm.
instead of a guitar pickup, which can be pretty terrible.
Yes, they can be terrible or they can be okay, but they're never superlative.
Yeah,
I mean, think about the instrument. It is made like it's with the same thing with an acoustic piano, right? It's not designed for you to have your head in the box, and yet that's what a
yeah,
pickup gives you, right? It's designed so that you listen to it from some distance away. I mean, those were the conditions that originally generated the instrument in the first place. So I think that invariably, from the standpoint of fidelity and the sonics of it, a pickup will always bring about compromises. It will never be amazing, except you might get an amazing performance if the performer can move around. But yeah, if somebody insists on using a pickup in the studio, I will also see if I can't augment with some room sound, even if it means re-amplifying something later, which is a technique that gets used more often with drum kits or electric guitars, but can also be used with acoustic recording as well. You can record something direct, play it out into a room with some speakers, and amplify or record the room and get a little bit
sure,
of the acoustic into the recording. It's not the
sure.
same, but it's satisfying.
So this is I don't know. You see if there is a something that you'd like to say when you think of acoustic guitar, especially thinking of someone who has to maybe start, fiddling around with, you know, all the parts, even the virtual parts. What comes to your mind when you think of an acoustic guitar in terms of frequencies,
Well,
problems, or
yeah,
you?
there are three things that immediately come
Great,
to mind. First of all, the low end, and you mentioned this before, um,
yeah,
making sure that when you capture, you don't capture any unmusical resonances or so much deep bass that you have to do aggressive filtering later, because filtering, to have to EQ something after the fact is, again, there are compromises there. It's never going to give you as good a result as getting a great capture to begin with. The holy grail is get such a good
yeah,
capture that you can't make it any better later.
yeah,
That's what
yeah,
we should
sure,
all be working towards. We try to get there, we get more or less close to it, and then we deal with it. So anyway, the deep bass, I mean, if you think about the fundamental of the top string on a guitar, it's 80 hertz, right? So, and anything below that is not going to be of musical in value. So that's just worth sort of tucking that bit of information into your head. It doesn't mean we filter it out. It just means don't expect to get much information below there. Especially when you
would you filter it out in a solo guitar recording?
only if it needed to be, but
Okay.
hopefully it doesn't need to be. The second thing is if you're using two microphones, that it's very easy to create dead spots. If you think about the range of frequencies that you can produce in an instrument, and you get unlucky, you can basically end up with holes in the frequency response of the instrument. Those are very hard to fix after the fact, because when you get two signals combining where you get cancellation, where you get some frequencies in the instrument that are disappearing, you can't recreate them because they're gone. They're missing.
Yeah.
We can play a little bit with delay between the two mics and see if we could bring something into focus a little bit. And sometimes that's successful. But this is where capture is important, and understanding something about stereo miking technique is important. Understanding something about physics is important as a
Yeah.
recording engineer.
And this has to be uh, fixed in the recording process, right? Because if you have phase going on, you have cancellation, and there is no going back, right?
Yeah, you can't go back. You sometimes you can make it better, a little bit better, but you can't. Sometimes you just can't fix it. You can't bring back something that just doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, the third thing, and this is actually, it's interesting. I think people get very focused on frequency. Immediately, I think, no, 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 it's not about frequency. It's about dynamics.
Yeah.
And here's, and I mean something very specific when I say this. If you think about the the amplitude, the level of the strike of the string compared to the ring of the string. If you have a very, very strong peak, a transient peak at the beginning of a note, it becomes very challenging for the listener, right? It can really it becomes challenging because the strike of the note can be hard to listen to and fatiguing over a long
Yeah,
period of time, and also it makes it hard to hear the note if you're sort of fending off the attack of the note. So getting your mic placement right so that you get the the ideal relationship between the attack and the sustain
release,
of the instrument,
sus- sustain. Yeah, right.
in some ways is as important, if not more important, than the frequency response of the sound. So it's this sort of time domain thing that happens.
Yeah, this is great. Great perspective, and one of the ways to treat that, if it's not treated well in the recording process, if is compressing, right? But that
Yes,
can be tricky if you
yes.
don't know
I mean,
what you're
you'll
doing.
always, yeah, there is a compressors bring compromises.
Yeah,
But yeah, that's right. I mean, a compressor is that's its job, is to manage the dynamic relationship over the, a musical event. But I think the better way of dealing with that is microphone distance and microphone position. If you point the microphone directly at the hole, you're
yeah,
more
sure.
likely to create problems, both in
Yeah,
terms of
yeah,
resonance and uneven sound, but also hearing if you've got a finger picking style, where the transient just gets too strong and overwhelming.
yeah. And this is why I didn't ask, but you said it anyway. This is why acoustic guitar is so challenging, not just because of the player, but because we have this whole spectrum and this whole dynamic. We have, I use a lot of open tunings to
Hmm.
say, so I can go pretty deep, close to a bass with the bass notes. But even we have this wide dynamic because we can have very soft notes or pretty aggressive attack to things, like percussions or whatever. So this can be really hard to treat, and this is one of the
Yeah.
things we would like to,
The
to
closer
to
you get
learn.
to the instrument, the more extreme that becomes.
Yeah, yeah. This is a great tip for uh, taking care of the problem before it occurs. This
Right.
is really a great tip. It's small things that we are not really thinking of. Uh, let's be geeky.
Yeah.
Hardware versus plugins. At home, people just have a sound card, a microphone. Hardware is pretty hard. Probably that's the yeah.
Yeah.
Probably
Hardware is
that
expensive to buy. It's expensive to maintain, and it's noisy. What else would you like me to say?
man.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
like working in the box.
from the standpoint of workflow and stability, yes. There are certain things that you can get in the analog world. And when you talk about hardware, you're talking about analog hardware, not digital hardware, because there's digital hardware too. But there you don't get the same advantages, obviously. With analog hardware, there's certain kinds of nonlinear kinds of processing, like excitation, that you get from tubes or that you get from optical circuits, old school opto compressors that are different in plugins than they are in analog. Just by definition, they work differently. Um, and so, I've known people who are fans of their tube direct boxes, for instance, that they like to run their signals through, just to get a little bit of that, um, the harmonic excitation that you get from tubes, and this sweet even harmonic, coloration that you get. But in general, my feeling is, if you can imagine a sound, there are many different ways to get it. You can get it with hardware, you can get it in
Yeah,
the box. And so I'm not absolutist in saying, oh, you have to do it this way or that way. But plugins are cheap. Plugins are it's repeatable, it's
Yeah,
stable, it doesn't
yeah.
require maintenance until the computer manufacturer decides to change the operating system and your plugin doesn't work anymore. Then you've got a problem. But
You can turn off noise,
that's right. That's right.
which is
Um, yeah, or you
which
can
is
add
okay.
noise, but you have the
Oh,
choice.
you can add noise,
But you have the choice.
but you have the choice.
That's right.
Great. Yeah,
Um,
I remember reading a Jeff Beck interview, and he said it doesn't matter which guitar or amp you give me, the sound is here. I will always go that way, which is
that's my feeling. I think it's easy. I mean, it's fun to fall in love with technology, or to fall. I mean, in the same way that you have like your favorite guitar, you might have your favorite equalizer, or and you develop a relationship with it. You know exactly what it does, and when you go to change something, you know what's going to happen. And so, and I think that's part of the fun. So I'd never want to talk somebody out of exploring the
yeah.
potential of hardware versus plugins. It's part of the passion, I think, that we get to bring.
Oh, exploring led to some of the most incredible discoveries
Yeah,
ever,
yeah.
not just in music. So
But I think that's the sign of a true artist in a way, is somebody who has an idea in mind and that's what they go after. It's not about the gear, right? It's not about the tools.
yeah. And speaking of which, I come at the right moment with a question. Mic and preamp choice. Uh, this is basically on your experience, of course.
Mhm.
If there is some combination you like, this is just geek talking or gear talking or whatever. But today we have so many recreations, and people might like to go towards something looking for a sound, or
Yeah.
this is
I
just
think,
on your experience.
well, sure. Let's see. Some of my favorite I mean, I have some favorite microphones that I like. If I could choose like six microphones that would work in every application, right? I would choose the Sennheiser MKH 800 Twin, which is a double dual diaphragm microphone that could be put into mid-side or what. You can do anything with it, but it's all in a single capsule. It's stupid expensive, but a very, very good sounding condenser array or pickup. Um, Actually, some of my favorite recordings I did with a mid-side Neumann SM69 microphone in the middle with a couple of outriggers, um, condenser outriggers like a B&K 4011s, or um, just to pick up some of the ambience around. Um, my all-time favorite microphone, although maybe it's a little out of context here, is the Microtech Gefell 92.1. It is like the greatest microphone. I have three of them.
Oh,
I love the sound that comes through them. I just do. It's beautiful. It's warm. It's balanced. It's clear. Um, but the other thing that people should think about is ribbon microphones, as opposed to condenser microphones, can be a very interesting choice for acoustic guitar. Condenser microphones, a condenser element, which is in the mic, it uses a capacitor, and capacitors have a high frequency resonance to them. That's one of the reasons that they sound as bright as they do and articulate as they do. And so, hope the background noise is okay. Um, so a ribbon microphone has a low frequency resonance, and it's much smoother on the top. The high frequency response is much smoother. They're also less expensive than condenser
yeah.
microphones by and large. Um, so, like the Royer 122s, which are ribbon mics um, that have an active preamp inside, so they're very low noise. You don't need as much gain as you do with a classic ribbon. Older ribbons tend to be a little bit on the dark side, but some of the newer ribbons are fantastic. So the 122s, I think, are an excellent choice for acoustic guitar. They also are
Right.
bidirectional, which means you get a little bit of the ambience. You can control how much you get by how close you get.
Like figure eight.
Yeah.
bidirectional in front
Any
and
ribbon microphone is figure eight by definition. They have to be
from rear. Okay.
because of the physics of how they work. Um,
Yeah. And you don't think they take away some of the articulations of an instrument like a acoustic guitar?
they're not as they're not as bright,
Yeah, yeah.
but they can be quite sensitive to very low amplitude signals. So the Royers are incredible. If you've never tried them, I
No,
highly
I didn't.
recommend them. Yep, Royer 122s. Um, as far as microphone preamps, I mean, my favorite. I You need a fast preamp. You need something that will allow the transients to pass without compressing them. The Grace and the Millennia microphone preamps are my favorite. Um, Both excellent mic pre's. Great River makes a fantastic microphone preamp. Um, this is one place where it doesn't make a lot of sense to compromise because the microphone preamp is like your window into the box.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
It's
hard to
what the
avoid.
microphone hits first.
Yeah. So yeah, and cheap mic pre's are likely to be noisy and maybe I don't know how to describe the effect. They sound small compared to a really well engineered microphone preamp. There are some mic pre's that are kind of good utility mic pre's, like the really nice preamp, the RNC, or yeah, really nice preamp. It's like $200 for a single channel. It's great if you're doing sort of for general purpose recording, but for the kind of
Is the
thing,
name really
uh,
nice preamp?
yeah,
Is the brand?
yeah,
Okay.
the RNP, I think is the acronym. Um, but this is where you're going to spend some money on a
Yeah,
mic pre.
yeah, sure. Definitely. Uh, you told us about mic distance.
Yeah.
But is there something because I asked you because I years ago I listened to some classical records and the label had this they usually took the performance they grabbed the performances from pretty far away with the microphones
Hmm.
like I don't know 3-4 meters which uh, I can never translate the
Yeah,
the
10,
the
it's about 10 feet, 10, 12 feet,
about
something
10
like that.
feet,
Yeah.
yeah. What's your other than problems like you were describing before? Is there something you'd rather go for with make
Well,
distance?
here's where this idea of the recording being an illusion comes into play. If you are listening, and this idea of being able to filter out sound because of how we mentally focus our attention. If you walk into a concert hall and there's a guitar on stage, or you walk into a room and there's a guitar in front of you, and you walk closer and closer and closer to the instrument until you get the right balance of direct and ambient sound for you as an audience member, I can guarantee you're going to want to move in another like third of the distance towards the instrument to get a good recorded version of the sound. If you stop where it's satisfying to you as a live audience member, it's going to sound too far away in a recording. A lot of recording engineers I know who specialize in classical music get some earbuds that they trust and wear them while they're setting up the microphones and adjust
Yeah,
microphone position, and they understand what they're hearing,
yeah,
and typically you'll find you'll need to move in closer than you think if you're looking for a natural or representative sound. um, so that's the first thought. You probably need to be if you're just getting started, you probably need to be closer than you think. So the second thing is having, if you have the luxury of having two stereo pairs, have one close and another far. Make sure there's something called the 3-to-1 rule in miking. I don't know if you've heard of this. It's a general idea, which is if you have a
not really.
microphone close to an object, recording an object, another microphone should be at least 3 times the distance in
Okay,
order to avoid destructive phase interference that is problematic. So if your first pair is 1 foot away, Have the other microphones be at least 3 feet away,
Okay. Right.
just as a rule. And then you can later you can blend.
Yeah.
You can get a good clear sound and augment the the stereo image by bringing in a little bit of the second pair.
Sure. Which is why we have reverb.
That is why we have reverb. Yes, and we have wonderful reverbs in the world. Yeah.
uh, this is a complicated matter. I know. Usually, people are dealing with good plugins. Is there something? I don't want you to get into, advertising stuff. I imagine this is always pretty you know it can be not too easy if you just don't want to name brands or whatever. Is there something you can say about reverb? Differences, rooms, plates, chambers, thinking of the acoustic guitar, and maybe something a little more technical, like pre-delays, or there is a huge word in where we get lost all the time. We
Yes.
have presets, but
There's a lot to say about reverb. Um, here's I guess here's what I can say about that. So first of all, I will say Lexicon and TC Electronics, the M6000 and the Lexicon 480 and 960 are kind of like the gold standards of reverb.
you
From
talk
back
about
from
the
back in the
machine,
day,
right?
those are hardware. There have
Yeah,
been plugins that have been made since that rely on their same
yeah.
IP basically. Um, but those, I just have to call them out as it's kind of like talking about Neumann or Telefunken microphones. It's like, these are the standards to which we refer or compare the new versions. Um, plate reverbs are not designed to be a natural reverberant field. They will always sound more like an effect because the sound doesn't decay the way it would decay in an acoustic environment. The high
Hmm.
frequency roll off is linear. It doesn't have changes in density as the signal decays and the delays get closer and closer together. So if you're after an effect, plates are cool, but they're not going to sound natural. If you want something to sound like a natural room, use a room.
Yeah.
And you can adjust. The pre-delay will give you the illusion of the size of the room to some extent, along with the decay time.
Hmm.
The two things I will say is don't overuse early reflections. Early reflections drive me crazy because the early reflections refers to the very first few discrete repeats of the sound that happen in a room. And if you accentuate them too much, they will likely interfere with the dry signal. And it's like a peacock likes to show its feathers to impress you. Reverb manufacturers like to accentuate early reflections to impress you that they go, oh, look what we can do. We can create the illusion of the sound of the concertgebouw or something like that. I
So
usually
technically, well, I'm sorry. Finish, please.
I usually just turn them way down, the early reflections. And I also usually roll off a lot of the high end, most
On the
reverb
reverb.
on the reverb itself. Most of them will allow you to roll off within the plugin itself. And I usually roll off energy above 3 or 4,000 hertz so I don't hear the plectrum or the attack of the instrument in the reverb too much.
Yeah. So
Uh,
for the readers or the listeners, when you talk about a control to measure the earlier fractions, is there a
there's
control
usually an
like
early
just?
reflections level. Yes.
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.
Uh, can you say something about guitar and voice? Because we deal many times with people are singing and playing along. So something to say about microphone techniques, do things at the same time, bleed, uh, m- mic, microphone, you know, what you can
Yeah.
use or.
I guess the one thing that I will say, the, the one mistake to avoid is thinking that you can use one mic to pick up a guitar and voice at the same time
Okay.
and get the balance and the separation the way you want it. Um, Usually, if you're recording a performance that needs to be recorded at once, singing and playing at the same time, you're going to have to get in closer than you would otherwise. Chances are,
Yeah.
you'll have to accept some bleed. So uh, the one thing you want to be careful about, there's this thing called off-axis coloration. It's a technical term, which
Hmm.
refers to the sound that comes into a directional microphone from the side. So let's say I have a mic here, so a mic pointing at my voice, just like this, right? On axis, it sounds nice and clear. You hear the top end, my sibilants, and all of that. If I move around to the side, you lose a little bit of the high frequency, but you still hear the low frequency,
Yeah.
right? So imagine that this is the microphone that I'm singing into, and the sound of the guitar is coming in from the side. Now the sound of the guitar that's bleeding into the mic here is going to be dull and rolled off. That's called off-axis coloration. And so you have to work to make sure that when you add the two microphones together, that doesn't influence the sound too much. So it usually means getting in close so that there's not too much leakage or too much bleed into the microphone that's pointed at, whether it's the voice or the guitar, having them pointed a little bit away from each other and having them be fairly close in.
Great. Great. Maybe using a dynamic. One of the two can be a dynamic.
Sure. Yeah, I mean that makes sense. That makes sense because dynamics tend to be a little less sensitive, and so they will reject low-level signals better. Um, and chances are the dynamic would be on the vocal and not on the
Yeah.
guitar. Yeah,
Yeah. So maybe last question.
sure.
Home recording tips, which can be whatever comes to your mind, or even suggesting a microphone or a preamp or something. It depends on the budget, of course, but maybe according to your experience,
Yeah.
large diaphragm, small diaphragm, or whatever.
Um, I would say, first of all, have fun. Don't get too worried about making mistakes because you can always there's always next time. Um, and I would say probably um, for like technology to start with, there are two microphones I'll mention. One is the Audio Technica, I think it's the 4077. It's a large diaphragm condenser mic. It's pretty versatile. Um, it's actually a great mic to have because it's great on voices, and you could also use it for an acoustic guitar. The other the other I'll mention is the Neumann KM184, um, which I think is a nice, warm sounding
Yeah,
condenser
I have
microphone.
one. It's a great
Yep.
pickup,
Yep.
a great microphone. Yeah.
Yep. And then I would say for microphone preamp, everybody has to invest in a sound card or an interface. So I would
Yeah.
say just find one that's got good mic pre's in it as well. They're
Suggestions?
well, depends on your budget, right? So I think the what's the name of the company? RME makes some very nice interfaces, and their mic pre's are good. I
The
think they're
one you're listening me to through is RME. Yeah,
yeah.
it's
If
very
money is no object, actually, they're not that expensive. So merging technologies
mm,
makes a device. It's amazing. It's an amazing D to A converter and A to D converter, and it's got great microphone preamps in it.
oh,
Um,
right.
and I think they're probably something like 1,500 euros or something
Hmm,
for two channels, but it's great,
great.
great.
So if there is nothing else that comes to your mind randomly, I think that's it.
Um, Thank you. No, I appreciate to have the chance to talk to you about this, and I wish I could spend more time. I'm amazed that an hour has gone by.
Yeah,
um,
me too. Me too. It's
but I will say I actually have to run. I have to attend board of directors meeting for the Audio Engineering Society. So this is a bunch of people who like to think deeply about making acoustic guitar recordings sound better. Uh, so they're all
So
gonna
you're working for us even when you leave us.
always,
Oh,
always,
always.
even in my
Yeah.
dreams. Yes, but I thank you.
Okay. Oh, I thank you for your time. This has been great. I will end the broadcast now, and then we can say goodbye.
Okay,
Goodbye, Jonathan Wyner.
take
Thank you.
care. Next time in Italy, I'll see you.
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah.
Goodbye.